Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Peter and Debra are doing a podcast. Peter, I had some more contacts from people who listen to our podcast recently. I'm always so thrilled when a listener says, I listen to your podcast and I really enjoy it. So, yeah, it's like, listen, seriously, listeners, if any of you feel like emailing us or commenting or just saying anything to tell us you actually listen, even if you don't like it, we don't care, because it's thrilling to think there's listeners.
It is, because we like having these chats anyway, don't we? But
yeah, we do.
Yeah, no, it is that's really good. And I did see someone saying they liked it best when we disagreed with one another. So we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, let's have a fight, Peter. I'm going to take you down. So how have you been? What have you been up to?
Well, I've had some more car trouble, and my car wouldn't start yesterday. And the mechanic came out and he ran a test on the car, and he printed out the results of the test. And I've got this little receipt here, and it's the sort of receipt which a number of charity chief executives might receive. Never mind my car battery, because it says state of health 8%. State of charge 0%. So for everyone who's been feeling worn out, I hope that they had a chance to recharge their batteries a bit better than my car battery over Easter, and have a state of health that is considerably more than 8% and considerably more charged than 0, which my car now has. So I'm back on the road and back out to cricket.
And car is healthy again, Peter.
It is 100% state of health and 100% state of charge, at a small cost to myself.
Actually, talking of health, that makes me think of something I've been thinking about recently. So I have a long-term, chronic, incurable health condition. And I developed this condition about 5 years ago. And when I was going to my doctor with my symptoms, and they ask you about, does your family have a history of these particular things? I said no, because I didn't think we did. And then sort of 4 years down the line, my symptoms got worse. I had to go back and be retested. And it turns out we found the cause of this thing. But the problem is that because I didn't know that my brother had this particular condition, I didn't tell my doctor when they asked me originally, so they didn't carry out the tests that would have found that thing. And so that by the time they found it, the damage to my system is permanent. So it can't be reversed now. Now, but actually, because you know me, Peter, I can turn every single thing that happens in my life into a lesson and a message for charities, chief execs and trustees. But it did make me think about the importance of sharing information. Now, my brother didn't deliberately not tell me. It just never occurred to him. He just cracked on with his life and dealt with his condition, etc. But it was... But it just got me thinking about trustees and CC all. So you will have heard me bang on about this before, but I just think it's so important. I say, trustees, you really must CC all in your communications with each other and with the chair and with the executive. And the reason you need to do that is because you need to know what's going on. You are legally accountable for the organisation. And that means that if anything goes completely wrong, you saying, well, I didn't know anything about it, I can't be held responsible, unfortunately, it doesn't wash. You are still held legally accountable, because if the Charity Commission comes in and inspects you, they will be saying, well, why didn't you know? Why didn't you check in? Your duty as a board of trustees is to communicate with each other and find out information. And it's amazing when I say you've got to do it, how much resistance I get. People are like, I don't want my inbox clogged up, or I don't want to clog up somebody else's inbox, or I don't want to see an exchange of information which isn't relevant to what I'm interested in. But the thing about that is you never know what you need to know. And if you don't engage, what you're basically doing is giving away the power to somebody else to decide what it is that you get to know as a board member, when technically you should know everything. So I'm always a little bit impatient with those people who say, it's too much, I'm too busy. I'm like, you're an adult. You don't have to read them, but don't willingly give away the power of information and the power of knowledge, because it's so dangerous. And I've seen so many charities get into massive trouble because a decision has been made. It's not been a particularly good decision, and it might have been a better decision if all of the trustees had been involved, but because they weren't, they're still held accountable for it. So yeah, it's just the importance of sharing. I mean, I'm probably an oversharer, to be fair, but I think that it's better to overshare with a board of trustees than it is to undershare and have people not know what's going on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, how do you well, firstly, I'm really sorry about what's happened to you, and how your brother must feel like that about that, I should think is awkward.
Oh no, he's fine. He's like,
are you?
Yeah.
You
yeah,
still
I
love
am,
him.
of course. Yeah, of course he didn't do it deliberately.
No.
He was his private medical business, so he just didn't even occur to him to share it with the family. But now I've told them, if anything goes wrong, if you break your ankle, if you have a cold or a sniffle, for God's sake, tell everybody, because you never know that one of us might need it to prevent something dreadful going on.
How do you? I do have some sympathy with not sharing every email with everybody, though. I guess we've talked before about being a trustee needs to feel manageable and strategic. And although you say it's important, you're responsible for everything and you need to know about everything, actually you don't really mean that, do you? You don't really need to know about everything that's going on. So how, I guess the question is, in sharing things with everybody, how does one arrive at what feels like a manageable flow of information for busy volunteers who have lots else going on in their lives? And I must admit, I do quite often in my cricket role only email the chair or only email the chief executive, just because I feel like I don't want to bother everyone. And maybe I've got to say, maybe I'm getting that a bit wrong.
Well, maybe, Peter. I mean, so obviously little trivial things, of course not. You don't need, if your chief exec emails you to say a big success has happened, you don't all have to CC all to reply well done. So I'm not talking about that sort of thing, but I'm talking about general questions and comments or observations, or a question on the paperwork, or a question about a thing that's happening, or a question about social media or whatever. Those sorts of things do need to be shared. Other trustees don't have to engage if they choose not to, but they need to be aware of the conversations, because I liken it to, if you're in a meeting room and your chair and your chief executive disappear off behind a screen and whisper, and you don't know what they're talking about. And that's basically the equivalent when it comes to email comms. And I stress it particularly because I think the hassle of dealing with the petty, silly things that you don't need to deal with is outweighed by the benefit of actually having access to understanding the conversations that are going on. For example, I often advise chief executives, particularly chief executives who have really dreadful relationships with their chairs. I say, don't email your chair, email the whole board with information, because you report to the whole board. And often you see that when the relationship feels like it's just between the chief exec and the chair, other trustees can sometimes feel excluded, or they can feel they don't really know what's going on, or there's no point because it's all stitched up. Or what happens is that other trustees don't witness any kind of poor behaviour either on the part of the chief executive or the part of the chair. So it's always better to have some kind of oversight of it. And it's, you can, like IT is so clever now, you can easily set up a separate inbox, for your emails from the board, so it's not coming up in your normal inbox and getting in the way during the working day, and you can just go and have a quick look at times. And people, you can take responsibility for deciding how to do it like an adult.
There's definitely been times when, as the chief executive, I have seen trustees playing particular roles. So the finance expert asks the questions and gives assurance on the accounts, and the marketing expert offers thoughts on what the campaigns are looking like, and the paediatrician looks at the safeguarding and the children's issues. And actually, what is most useful to me, and where the real richness comes, are the conversations between those perspectives, where they appreciate one another's more detailed expertise, but are talking about the whole.
Because they're all accountable for it.
I
mean, the paediatrician may have particular expertise in safeguarding, but the whole board is accountable for safeguarding. And if the paediatrician gets it wrong, the whole board go down. They don't get to say, well, that wasn't my job, that was her job, or whatever, or his job. It's the same with finance. Trustees who say, like, I don't do the finances, that's done by, our treasurer or our finance committee. I'm like, you need to do the finances, because that's probably one of the things that's going to get you into trouble. And if you don't know about it, you can't ask the questions. And in a sense, don't be afraid of being stupid. in fact, the stupider you are about the finances, the better questions you will ask, and then it will come down to the details. So when you say things like, I don't understand the difference between restricted and unrestricted, or I don't understand why we've got to account for this grant, this 3-year grant, all in the first year, and then it looks like we're making a loss every year. Can somebody explain that to me? Those are brilliant questions to ask, and it's the sorts of questions that help other trustees to up their game, and also other trustees who either think they know or know they don't know but don't want to admit they don't know. It's super helpful to those people as well. So, yeah.
Well, on the question of being stupid versus asking difficult, silly questions, perhaps you could give me some advice on this. So at Somerset, it's a very exciting and important cricket season for us. I think I've mentioned before, it's our 150th anniversary season, and I had a fancy word for that, which I've now forgotten. It's the first season when we've got a Tier 1 women's team as well as a men's team, and we've put a lot of effort into that. And Somerset won their first women's game against your team, Surrey, last week, and I was one of the few people there, and it felt a really historic moment. And
well
my
done.
handwritten scorecard is going to go into the Somerset Museum for posterity. But our men's team, who we thought had a great chance of winning the county championship for the first time ever, have not got off to a very good start. We are underperforming, and we know we're underperforming, and it's very frustrating, and the fans are very frustrated, and probably there's no people who are more frustrated than the players themselves and the coaches. But that issue is almost so big that it could get lost in the leadership and management of the club, I suppose. And I'm wondering, and we can generalize it beyond Somerset itself, but how does one raise, intelligent questions or observations about that situation, which is so bloody obvious to everyone, and but asking a question, why aren't you scoring enough runs, or why aren't you taking enough wickets, is, they don't need me to ask them that question, but there's something about the challenge and support of where the club is and what its ambitions are this season and what's seeking to achieve, that in the overall kind of mix of things, I think it's really important for the members and supporters to know that we're all hands to the pump and all, on the case in this. So what would your advice be to the kind of leaders and administrators in that sort of a situation to strike that right balance between challenge and support?
Well, it's never easy, is it? I mean, one thing I will say, though, is I think I've noticed this quite a lot in sporting, in the sporting world, in that, so in a charity, we know that if we listen to our donors and we listen to our beneficiaries, we do end up producing better services. So and particularly beneficiaries, we've now, in the olden days, and not that, when I say olden days, not that long ago, it was very much, we would do unto those people that we serve.
Yeah.
And now we've changed, we've realized that it's much better to genuinely listen to what they say and then adapt what we do back to them. But in sports, it seems to be very often that teams seem to largely ignore the fans' input and advice. You know what I mean? It's sort of written off as just noise, and they love this, or they, whereas fans very often have a lot of, they should have put so and so on earlier onto the pitch, or they shouldn't have fielded a left arm slow bowler against this brilliant batter. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's something about genuinely taking on board fans' feedback and advice about what they observe, because they're observing in a very different way, and in some way, shape or form reflecting back to them that you are listening, that actually you think they have expertise in it. Because after all, you're playing cricket for them. They're the people you're serving, are the fans, are the people who come and watch, aren't they? I mean, you might be playing it for the love of it and the joy of it, but ultimately a professional team. So that's one thing I would say, is that the map between the charity sector is that listen to those people you're there to serve, and properly listen to what they have to say, and that might help. The only other thing I'd say is that, I have this phrase, learn, adapt, evolve. So when something goes wrong at DSC, what we do is we ask questions about what happened, what did we learn, We often do a thing called I've forgotten what it's called now, but called appreciative inquiry. I don't know if you've come across it, Peter, but where we do a plus delta exercise. So for example, we did it in our first quarter. We've just completed our first quarter and had our board meeting. And at our first senior leadership team after the first quarter, we did a plus delta on the quarter. So what went well in that quarter, what didn't go well, or what went less well, and what could we do differently in response to those things we didn't do well. And so what that does is that makes it feel safer for people to admit mistakes and errors. So members of my leadership team will say, actually, well, what, I didn't do this thing, and I think if I'd have done that, that might have had a different outcome. So there's something about, if you approach it however you do it, in a sense of it's just about learning. It's not about blame. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about. The other thing is that, if you punish people, so if someone, and again, this might not, maybe we'll have an argument about this, Peter, but if a really poor bowler, or a bowler performs really badly in a match and then is dropped from the next one, the message you're giving is punishment, don't admit to it, don't own up to learning. It's very rare that actually that incentivizes better performance. Whereas when you have a conversation that says, what happened in this thing? What did you learn from it? What could you do differently next time? You might get a different result. Then the next bit, of course, is adapt. So this is about, okay, we've learned, we've looked at what went well, we looked at what are we going to change? What are we going to do differently for the future? And then evolve is then move on to the next stage, then try the new thing, etc. So, and I know it sounds a bit sort of management consultant speak, but I think that's all you can ever do, really. But I think the key thing is you've got to make people feel safe. If people feel that mistakes or poor performance are going to be punished and they're going to be humiliated and nobody's going to have their back, they are never, ever, ever going to say that was my fault and I need to do something different. They'll be defensive and they'll be angry.
I think learn, adapt, evolve is a great frame for our players to talk to one another about, and they are expert in this, and they are super committed to one another and to the club. Where I think I have the disagreement, or where I think it's become more complicated, is around the fans. I mean, I am a super fan, and I feel like I care as much as the players, but I'm not even sure I do, to be honest. But the noise on social media is off the scale, and
of course it is.
Nonsense and the rubbish, frankly, that some people will articulate about questioning the commitment of individual players. The best person for each game is always the one who isn't picked. So I think that needs a bit more thought, because I don't think fans are irrelevant. There's something in there, but I do think that this whole piece about how polarized and hateful comment has become is such
social media,
the last thing, the real the folk who are going to drive the performance, they're going to achieve that with one another rather than with the so-called keyboard warriors.
But I'm sure there are ways of doing it. I'm sure there are ways of engaging with the fans that says, we're not going to just listen to shouting and criticism, because that's not helpful. But if you have thoughts or suggestions, or if you spotted something in play that we might learn from, if you know something somewhere else, then by all means share it.
And some of it's about acknowledgement, isn't it?
Exactly.
We know, of course, we know how you're feeling, and having created expectations and excitement around this great season. Anyway, it's still early days, and there's plenty of time to go.
Masses of time to go, Peter.
The ups and downs of sporting and also, leadership life.
I will just add one thing to it, though. You also have to give people time to grieve. Very often we move far too quickly into analysis and moving forward, and we don't give people a chance to feel really shitty about a thing. And I think it's really important that we allow people to feel angry with themselves. We allow them to, grieve the fact that they didn't perform or things didn't go to plan, and like not treat that as that's a problem. It's really, if you did a shit job, it's really okay for you to feel shit about it. It's always been my mantra, is like, don't feel bad about feeling bad because you did a bad job, because it's really okay for you to feel bad, but don't stay in the badness. I have another saying, which is, you can wallow in self-pity, but you're not allowed to drown in it. It's really okay to feel sorry for yourself for a while and to have that acknowledged. Like, I get it, Peter, you feel really bad about how poorly you performed, and I get it. And, okay, now we move on. It's that sort of thing.
Oh, that's quite good. It's frustrating that we reserved our particularly poor performance for Surrey, who are your team.
Yes.
I can't say but there sorry. We are.
Well, you just faced a superior team, Peter. Deal with it. There is a little
there is a little bit of that, but you're not so superior as to be unbeatable, because we beat you at the end of last season. But this isn't a cricket podcast. It's a leadership management podcast. But there are definitely some lateral lessons and techniques that I think can be applied to these.
For sure. Leadership is leadership, whatever you're leading. That's why whenever you go to leadership conferences, you very often get, Gareth Southgate or the rugby chap when we won the Rugby World Cup all those years ago. Sir Clive Woodward, isn't it?
Yeah, Clive Woodward.
Yeah. You often, I remember, going to a thing where, what's his name? The runner. Brilliant. I've completely forgotten. It's gone out of my head. He used to be in the army. But anyway, people like Kelly Holmes, you often hear them talking about leadership from the context of a sport. So I think the analogies work. It's just we're particularly interested in cricket. So listeners, you get a lot of cricket matchovers between running a charity and running a cricket club or being a fan.
The accountability is so acute in sport, isn't it? There's just no escaping from it. Everyone can see your mistakes. Everyone could see some of my mistakes as a charity leader, but there were plenty of others which there was the opportunity to kind of recover and learn quietly.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen, Peter, but there's I haven't had a chance to read it thoroughly. I've just skimmed it, but there's a new report out from the Charity Commission about trustees they commissioned Pro Bono Economics to do it. And it's really, really interesting. There's lots of stuff in there, lots of meat in there. But one of the things that leapt out for me was in one of the recommendations, it was basically, I'm paraphrasing now, but it's basically saying that the skills that boards lacked were skills in, for example, law or accountancy, and how they judged that because of how many charities went for external legal advice when they might not if they had a lawyer on the board, for example. And I would always guard against that, to be honest. There's a number of reasons why you have to be super careful about relying on the advice of your lawyer on the board. Firstly, lawyering is like any other profession. Yeah. You're not always like fundraising, corporate fundraising is profoundly different to event fundraising, to major donor fundraising, to community fundraising. There's very, very different skills. And it's the same in law. A charity, any old lawyer is not skilled necessarily in charity law, which is a different discipline. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is that the problem is when you have people like that on your board who you rely on to give you the advice, you have a tendency to take that advice. And that basically gives them sort of more power within the board to dictate what happens. Whereas when you go for external advice, the whole board is able to evaluate that advice in a different way. So, and also you put, an enormous amount of pressure on the one accountant or the one lawyer on the board by doing that. And actually, even if you did have a really good lawyer on the board, I would always advise boards, if they can afford to pay for external advice, particularly in high-risk situations, because that's better governance than just relying on your board members. So that did leap out to me as a thing about skills. And I have this thing, I'm sure we've talked about this before, but I also have this thing about, what skills are you actually looking for on a board, really? Is it really a marketing director skill that you want, or is it someone who has an interest in marketing and can ask questions about it? I still think that the skills that we tend to advertise for are not necessarily the skills that we actually need. We need people who can question well, have the ability to think strategically, who know when not to dive deep down into the weeds, and that's not necessarily linked to having a professional qualification, anything. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm going to struggle to disagree with you here, because I think, asking the right questions is the key, isn't it? Asking the right questions as part of a team, rather than being everyone looking at you to provide the answer.
Yeah.
And say, oh, okay, Mr. Accountant, do the numbers add up? Well, it's not your job to say, as a trustee, if the numbers add up. It's to be confident you've got a capable executive team who are delivering numbers which make sense and are understandable. I haven't got much else to report. I did have a very interesting visit to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, wearing my Nord Anglia education hat. Visited 3 fantastically interesting schools and met loads of incredible young people from all over the world, and teachers and parents, and we just had fascinating conversations about the safety and well-being of pupils in schools and in the world. I haven't kind of synthesized all that into quite what it means for the organisation and the world, and I haven't reported back to them yet, so I probably shouldn't shoot from the hip and offer a few thoughts from. Yeah, but
did you notice any cultural differences, though, Peter, in the approach to the safety of young people, or does it largely reflect, in other words, do young people mostly feel the same about most stuff?
There are cultural differences in the United Arab Emirates from the UK. Their society is structured in a different way from ours, so there are different power dynamics that flow from that. They have habits, expectations, and kind of practices around EDI, which are different from ours. But the paramountcy, the primacy of the child is fundamental to everything which the schools are seeking to do. And that's the thing to kind of test and explore and understand with the many people involved in helping these children flourish. How does a young person's voice and kind of perspective and identity and potential flourish alongside all the others, whatever the environment? And I think that absolutely is universal. So you can have great conversations with people from all sorts of walks of life, and that's the kind of common ground that everything else flows from. So it was fascinating. And one of the schools I went into had children from 76 different countries.
Wow. But how great for those children to have that exposure to so many different ways of looking at the world and so many cultures. I mean, if you think about in the UK, very often the people the children are exposed to are the same, that they're young British kids. They might have slight differences in background and religion or family circumstances, but largely it's the same culture. So it's very difficult for them to necessarily see the world from a different angle. Whereas when you're in a school where everybody's coming from all over the place,
and they're coming
much harder to be stuck in one view of life and one view of society and one view of your future.
Yeah, it is true. And coming in and moving on, and I mean. But with a kind of, and these are elite schools.
Of course,
it's and you do get that. I think you do get that diverse dynamic in some of our inner city schools, where people have come in and there's a real kind of patchwork of young people's insights and experiences and languages and creating an environment where you can replicate some of that in the skills and experiences and backgrounds of the teachers is really important as well.
Yeah. Yes. Also true.
But I'm kind of scratching at the surface of this stuff at the moment, and we should come back to it at some point, because there's lots to discover and understand, I think.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it just makes me think a lot about how human beings are largely the same really around the world. I remember years ago reading like an account of some refugees, their journey and their travel to come to the UK, and what it had been like. And what I was really, really struck by was, lots of what they're talking about was it wasn't about the awfulness of the thing. It was about normal human things, like one particular young woman who really fancied one of the other, refugees. And, was hoping that they would get together, and then he was flirting with somebody else, and how hurt she was by that as they're, sat in the back of a lorry. Do you know what I mean? It's just, it sort of amused me and reassured me that, even in these sorts of circumstances, when you think there's normal emotions, normal feelings, normal sorts of, they were more concerned about those emotional relationships. Although maybe that's a way of like not having to think about the horrors that you're going through. But I did find that like really thought-provoking actually as a thing. So I'm very interested in as we go along this path, Peter, with you in this new role, to sort of see where the common threads are across the world.
Well, it's lovely to see you post Easter.
Yes, and you too. And lovely weather, Peter. Yay, finally.
I know, it's very warm.
It is, and it makes me so happy not to be cold, let me tell you. You've no idea.
And what percentage would you give your state of health and your state of charge?
Well, I'm always pretty well charged, to be honest, Peter, because I'm a high energy person. My health is terrible. I mean, I would give my health. In fact, it's easier now to tell people what isn't wrong with me.
Oh no!
I have at least 3 major health conditions that require medication and management and all sorts of stuff. So I wouldn't be desperately positive about my health, but I wouldn't, honestly, I'm not particularly healthy, but I'm very positive about doing the things that I need to do to try and manage my conditions and all the rest of it. So, no, I'm all right, actually.
Well, if between us we can do something to reinforce one another's state of charge and hopefully get some of the listeners feeling charged up
as well,
then this is worth doing.
It is.
Very good.
We loved it.
All right, then.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, listeners. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.